All right, good afternoon and welcome back. So one of the things you'll notice is there's been a bunch of updates to our course website, and that's going to be the main focus of this sort of live session today. Is I'm going to tell you a little bit about those changes to get us all up to date now that things have kind of been finalized a little bit. So the reason there is a delay in some stuff is I worked to make sure we had all the practice quizzes, all the readings, and all of the quizzes up last weekend, so a few days ago, instead of staggering them out over the next 3 months. So that put a ton of work on the weekend, which means I was a little bit behind on getting our assignment up and getting recorded lectures. I think what we're going to do for the first chapter, chapter 1, is leave it as a reading rather than put up yet another video that people would see. And for chapter 7, I'll go over the main ideas after we talk about the changes to the website. And I have the slides posted so it can help you focus on some stuff. And you know that the quizzes is going to cover the material from this textbooks. So as long as you're reading it, you should do fine. The lectures are just me to help explain it and to give a little more context for it. So let me start off by just showing a few of the updates to the website. And I'm going to start sharing my screen over here. Move it off to the side. Did I forget to? Oh yeah, I have to turn off that and hide profile photos. There we go. So the biggest things are I added a couple folders. The weekly folders will still show you the kinds of things we're doing for each week. So if I go to week 3, chapter 7, nutrition, there's going to be a link to the reading. It should say reading, but I guess it doesn't, as well as a link to the smart book reading. Now, all these things are links to the electronic textbook. If you have the textbook as a physical copy or you have a PDF or some other way of reading it, you can safely ignore these things. They're just here to help you plan your schedule. They're also visible under the, let me clear this, the readings text only tab and the readings with smart book questions. I'll talk a little bit more about those in a second, but these are just links to the readings. They don't count for marks or anything. They're added as these items because Connect lets us add them as items, and it's a way to guide you when you read. There's also a link to the quiz, which says, and I'm hoping everyone does actually read the bolded red stuff. This is a graded quiz. Please do not click it unless you're 100% ready to do it because it counts for marks. But there's also unlimited practice quizzes on the Connect website. So as long as you get the actual marked quiz done by the deadline, and the deadlines are actually shown on the quiz tab, I'll show you that there as well, then you will be good. But the practice quizzes, do them as often as you want until you feel confident getting near full marks for a couple in a row, and then do the graded quiz, and I'm sure it'll go fine. Finally, I have links to the slideshows, and I'm going to include 2 links. If you're a person that time is precious and you're doing this, as we were discussing before, asynchronously, I have the original slideshow as produced by the publishers. And these are going to be found under the slideshows tab as well. And this is what the quizzes are based off of. So it contains no extras. It's the publisher slides, which will contain the information needed for quizzes. Now, if you're going through it in a little more detail and you're personally interested, I have a version of the slides that contains some of my additional slides from my biology classes that will give these things a little more detail or a little more context. In case you're interested, for example, what proteins look like and their components, I have some extra information here. Any of the extra slides, when you open this, I'll show you it soon, have a orange heading at the top, and it says in big red letters that this is extra information. It's not going to be on the quiz. This is only if you want more information. And for a lot of the units we're covering, I will be able to add a few extra things here that won't show up on the quizzes, but it's for personal interest only. So this is the weekly folder, and I'm going to try to get this up at the beginning of each week because it guides you through the week. And once the week is done, once we have our recording finished, If I go back to the previous week, you'll see I posted the recording at the top of that weekly folder. So that'll take you to the YouTube recording and you can watch it there. Additionally, instead of just using the weekly folder to find all these items, these are all just links to the files on the website, which means that the readings tab contains all the assigned readings. And this is the normal reading. This will just take you to the electronic book, and it has no special features or whatever. And all it is a quick way to click on, for example, chapter 7, nutrition, and it's going to take you to, it's going to sign me into the instructor version of this. But once I would sign in, it would then take me to that chapter on the ebook. I'm not going to show it now just because it works really weirdly when I try to demonstrate as the instructor, and it's not as easy to demonstrate there, but it'll take you to the normal textbook. And they all have deadlines. The deadlines don't mean anything. This isn't marked. It's just to tell you, you need to have completed reading for weight management by October 12th in order to have done the quiz on weight management and basic principles of fitness. So those deadlines are just to let you know when you should read everything by if you're going over the next 3 months as we go. The SmartBook version is exactly the same thing, readings with SmartBook questions, only it's enhanced with digital technology. Now, what this means is each of these have a few more interactions available, plus a series of questions at the bottom of each of the sections. So if I click on the one for nutrition, let's see if I can actually log in this time. Let me look at it from the point of view as not a student so that I can actually show this. Let me exit the preview. Let me go to the SmartBook readings. Let me click on nutrition, launch it. This should launch me in as, I don't want to show this. It shows people that have read it. I want to preview it so I can show you what it looks like for you. Start reading. It's going to let you do reading or questions. I'm going to click start reading. And it's the normal ebook, so it's the normal textbook, but it has different things highlighted. And at the bottom of each section, it has a series of questions that I can click on. And it tells me some tips for doing well. I'm going to ignore that. And then it gives me some concepts like good nutrition habits include choosing foods that provide needed nutrients and limiting substances linked to disease. Well, this one's pretty clear true, so I'm going to mark it. But if I needed help, it gives me a link to read about the concept, which will bring up that part of the textbook. I'll click it and it'll bring me to the section that I need to read. And let me see, I can go back to my questions. Nope, not that. Okay, let me click previous a couple times. Yeah, of course, it's confusing. Here we go. Next concept, they added a button here. So if I go back to my questions, I click true, and it lets me say how confident I feel about this. I'm going to say medium, and it tells me that I got it correct. If I get the concepts correct, it means it's not going to ask me future questions about that concept until it's convinced I know it. So it says 0 of 250 concepts. It's a huge series of questions, but as you demonstrate knowledge of each concept, it gives you fewer and fewer questions because you've shown, okay, you already get this. This is by far the slowest way to get through this textbook, but this is also the way that you can show that you know everything. If time is precious, I don't recommend using it this way, but if you're a person that likes to overstudy and really prepare for something, it's a good way to read through it and test yourself as you go. Keep in mind, if you read it the normal way, there's still all the practice quizzes. It's just one other way to do this. Okay, good. I just saw the question in chat and I was going to answer it right away, but that's good. So let's see if I can return to Blackboard here. Success. So none of these things actually need to be completed. And you'll notice that they don't show up under your grades in the grade center here. It's just the stuff that's actually worth marks. So these readings are just links to help you keep track of stuff. Finally, I have the slideshows here. And as mentioned, there's two versions. There's going to be the original version of each slideshow, which will have nothing added. So I was actually confused by this. This is the previous professor for the course. And when they gave me the Connect access, I wondered, wait, why did I get all of her presentations? Until I realized she actually prepared the presentations for the publisher. So that was super confusing to me. But it contains nothing extra, just the stuff covered in the text. This is where your questions on the quiz are based off of, that and reading the textbook. But for anything, you should be able to see it. Oh, you know what? You're in the NBB section. I got it set up for NBA, but I forgot to unhide it in the NBB section. I promise you I'll do that right away. Yeah, that's why that happened. Sorry, I was getting prepared and I forgot about that section. Now, the other version here, plus additional biology slides, this contains the exact same information, but it also says some additional slides to give it more context. The original slides doesn't have a lot of images, and it covers everything at a somewhat surface level. If you're interested and you remember taking high school biology, or you just wanted to learn a little bit more, I've included all these orange slides, which says from Kelly Reimer's biology as extra info, won't show up on quizzes, to give a little bit more context to everything here. So for instance, I give a little more context to how digestion actually happens, whereas the textbook just basically tells you, here's your digestive system, and it doesn't go into a huge amount of detail. So once again, just for wanting extra info, and of course it adds to the huge length of it, which is why there's so bloody many slides with these in here, but it's all extra. After I temporarily access the 2-week reading text only, it says it is no longer available now. Yeah, so if it does tell you that because the reading itself has a deadline, I might have to get rid of the readings of the deadlines if they're causing problems. Let me show you how you would access it normally. So I can click on Connect on our course website. I can go to the Connect page where you would just automatically log in because you're not me. And I'm going to not switch sections. I'm going to go into this student view, which is here. The student view is overwhelming because there's so much stuff here. That's why I have it organized on Blackboard, not here, although I tried to, but Connect is very limited. Once it loads, any second now, or any minute now. Okay, in the meantime, once I get into this website, I will see all those assignments with due dates here as well. So you can always access them from the Connect website. And on the left is going to be a nice picture of my textbook in a kind of bluish color, I think. And it's going to say fit. I may as well draw it since it's not loading. And well, that you can click on and you can access the table of contents there at any point in time. Let me try refreshing the page and see what's going on here. Okay, it works, but it's not working. Status report, get not supported. Get is totally supported here. Let me try going back to our website. Let me go back to Connect. Yeah, and let me go see if it works now. It should work. And let me go to student view. This time I'm going to do the side. Yes, I crossed my fingers and that made the difference. So if I zoom in here, it says read on the left. You can always just open the textbook and navigate to the table of contents to any chapter. Then you should be able to find everything here. So let me do a quick poll just to see if there's any questions about the updates to the website, because there was a lot of changes that, oops, I'm pushing the wrong button. I wanted to just show everyone that. Now, I'm going through the stuff that you finished off. So the not the references, the reflections, and I'm going to mark those over the next day. And I'm going to try to get our first assignment up, which I'm going to tell you a little bit as well. So there is a question, and this will be a question a couple of people have, but it's private, that once your trial access is over, will you still have access to the class? You'll have access to Blackboard, but you won't have access to any of the Connect website stuff. So anything that you find on the website, such as the ebook and the quizzes, are not going to have access. And where's the button I'm looking for? Over here. Nope, that's not the button I'm looking for. Here. All right, okay, sorry about that. So let's continue on. If we wanted to read it, you can read everything on the textbook here. You just go through the table of contents and you can see everything. So let me go back to our class, which is now, how do I do that? Return to instructor view, return to Blackboard. It's super awkward navigation, but it works. And let me go back to my student preview. The rest of this is, I think, nothing new. There's practice quizzes. These are links to the practice quizzes. You can access them at any time, even if it's past due. And the practice quizzes have unlimited attempts. They're not for marks, but if you consistently are getting 9 or 10 out of 10, then do the real quiz. You're going to do well. It doesn't come from the same pool of questions, but it's a similar difficulty. I set the quizzes up so they're well structured. 5 questions from the first chapter listed, 5 questions from the second chapter, unless it's quiz 6, which only covers 1 chapter, so it's 10 questions from it. And I set it up so that there is an easy 2 questions that are medium difficulty, and then a hard question for each chapter. So it's very structured to help you get through the material. And the quizzes are set up the same way. Like I said, it's 5 questions per, and this is the one that has the easy, then the medium and hard. And these are graded. The due dates are here. You'll notice that I extended the first quiz, as I mentioned. It's going to be due on Monday, October 4th. And you have 2 attempts for the first quiz. So if you accidentally, or if you did it already before I added the extension, you have a second attempt, and I'm just going to take whichever is the highest grade. Unfortunately, you're not able to do the practice quizzes after the Connect ends, whether that means that you no longer have Connect because the paid version runs out, or if you're using the trial version, it's only usable while you have access to it. So either during the trial period or paying for it. And that's just a response to a message I'm being sent that's private. Okay, so once again, I keep putting this in big text. Please don't click them unless you're 100% ready to do these quizzes. And they're for marks, and most of them only have 1 attempt, except for this first one, where I gave a second attempt to adjust for the fact that we had a slow beginning to the course because of all the changes and adding all the text, all the, what's it called, quizzes at the beginning. Yeah, 2 attempts just for the first quiz. And that's kind of an apology in that because I put all the 6 quizzes up the last weekend, I worked something like 30 hours over the weekend just to get it up. So I didn't have time to prepare the lecture and stuff. That gives you a little more time to focus on it. Okay, so let me show you 1 or 2 other things and maybe talk a little bit about nutrition, and then we can take off. Let me first see if there's any other questions. I'm going to run a poll here. I could just quickly relaunch this. It's quick and easy. Now, the next assignment is going to be our assignment 1, which I'm getting up later this week, and it deals with nutrition. Next week, there's a reflection. And the following week, I'm putting up quiz 2, which is only due on October 12th. So there's a lot of time to get quiz 2 if you are doing it because you own the textbook and you're taking the time to get it done then. So the assignment I don't have posted yet, but I'm going to show you one of the basis, or the basis of this assignment. So let me switch my share over to here. Ultimately, when I complete working on the assignment, you're going to see something like this, and we're going to link it to the stuff I talk about today a little bit. It says nutrition assignment, work in progress, nutrition labels on prepared foods, and it's a PDF file that contains places where you can type in. And what we're going to do is, since we're talking about nutrition, one of the things we do in this course is look at nutrition labels. So if I stop sharing my screen for a little bit, In Canada, we have laws that dictate what kind of information has to go on nutrition labels. And so if I hold up a label like this, the stuff that we see is there by law. For example, it's going to tell you the total number of calories. By the way, this is a very sugary cereal, so it's not going to be the world's healthiest thing. But we have the reported number of calories, and it includes cereal only or with milk. And then it reports the different content. So fat says there's 3 grams of fat made up of, let's see if I can get it closer here, 0.3 grams of saturated fat and 0 grams of trans fat. We're going to talk about this. Actually, trans fat from industrial sources by hydrogenating vegetable oils, which we'll talk about, is no longer allowed in Canada since 2018. So most of these numbers for trans fat are going to be low unless there's a source of trans fat that is natural, which can happen. Records cholesterol, sodium, carbohydrates. Carbohydrates is usually split up into the total carbs, the indigestible fibers, so stuff that passes through your digestive system without being broken down for energy, and then just regular sort of simple sugars. If you're wondering why 9 and 2 doesn't add up to 25 grams, that's because this includes starches, which don't have to be required or don't have to be labeled as sugars. So a lot of these things are going to kind of bend the rules to make it seem like there's less sugar, because starches are definitely a source of sugar. They just break down slower. And it has the proteins. The other thing that is required by law is it has to show certain vitamins. It used to just show vitamin D, but then the government of Canada decided that Canadians do get enough vitamin D anyway, so they wanted to show more of the other vitamins that we seem to be lacking. And in this case, it tells you based on a percent daily value of each of the vitamins you're getting. And so what this assignment is going to be, by the way, these are all per serving, which the Canadian standard also gives some reference servings. For dried cereals like this, it could be something like per 3/4 cup, and they might also have to list it with a cup of milk or something. So these are the recommended percentages of our daily intake. So for example, where it says 30% iron, if we had 3 servings of this, we would have almost all the iron we needed for the day just to have a healthy sort of lifestyle. Obviously, there's other sources of these vitamins, but if you're working really hard and planning your diet, these are the kind of things that you're looking at and you're writing down and recording. Now, in contrast to something a little bit less healthy, so let's pull out the pizza pops, because this is more my style, which is terrible to say, but we all know who I am and the way I live and how I'm trying to change. But you'll notice that it has much higher caloric content per one snack, 100 grams. Tells me there's a lot of fat, 12 grams of fat, which has actually some trans fat and saturated fat in it. There's a lot of cholesterol and sodium. There's a lot of sugar still, 34 grams made up of fiber and sugars as well, and proteins, and it does have some vitamins, so it's a health food technically is how I'm going to argue with myself, but it really isn't. So these labels are required on any prepared packaged food in Canada. Because they're such an important part about planning our diets, the quiz is not the quiz, the what's it called? The assignment is going to have you find one of these labels from something in your kitchen, or you can look it up online. As long as it's a Canadian nutrition label, you will find something that has all the info you need. And it asks us to record a few examples. So let's use cinnamon toast crunch. And you're going to be doing this for marks, and there's going to be some questions related to this. So I'm going to look at it and write down some numbers. Carbohydrates is total, it tells me, where am I? 25 grams of carbohydrates. It also tells me that of those 25 grams, there are 2 grams of fiber. Now, the instructions tell me total minus fiber, and that's because indigestible fiber is important for our health for many reasons. It can help absorb cholesterol if it's a fiber that dissolves easily and breaks up, or it can help increase the regularity of bowel movements and prevent constipation. So fiber is important, but it doesn't contribute energy really because we don't break it down and gain energy from it. So I'm going to subtract that fiber from my total carbohydrates, giving me 23 grams of carbs. Now, proteins, it tells me that there are 2 grams of protein. And for fats, it tells me there are 3 grams of fats in this cereal. I could also break it down into saturated and trans. For saturated fat, it says there's 0.3 grams. For trans fat, there's 0 grams. So that's not too exciting. Well, one of the things you'll see when reading, and that I'll also talk a little bit about today, is that each of these major macronutrients, these are called the macronutrients because they're the things we need the most of. In this case, the carbs, proteins, and fats, they make up most of our energy intake. And so we need to eat a decent amount of these each day. And each of them has a different energy value. Carbohydrates or sugars and starches, as well as fibers. Fibers don't have energy we can access, but the others have about 4 calories per gram. So for every gram, you're getting 4 calories out of it. I have 23 grams, so I can take 23 times 4 calories per gram gives me 92 calories, which I can enter in the green tab over here. Proteins happen to have 4 calories per gram as well. So 2 times 4 gives me 8 calories over here. And my fats, 3 grams, are actually very energy dense. So 3 grams times 9 calories gives me 27 calories from these fats. If I add these values up, 92 plus 8 plus 27, I have a total here of 127 calories from these main energy sources. Most labels round their numbers to the nearest tens place. So by law, I think they have to have it to the tens place, which means if I round this up to 130 calories, I'm rounding it to the nearest tens place. Finally, it's asking me to record the reported calories for one serving. And in this case, if I just switch it back over to the camera, at the top here, you'll see that it says 130 calories. So I'm going to only very quickly summarize it because you're going to see the instructions on the assignment when it's actually posted. But all I did was I counted I'm going to see if I can, I can't write on my own webcam. I counted the amount of fat, the amount of carbohydrates, and the amount of proteins on my table. And I'm going to multiply them by the amount of energy in each of these. I'll talk a little bit more about that. The reported amount was 130 grams. Sorry, 130 calories, which we actually got when we calculated it ourselves. Now, the good thing about this is it means that they're probably not lying about this. And it also means that if we had a recipe we're cooking in the kitchen ourselves, and if we could estimate the mass of the different carbs and proteins and fats we used, we could also calculate our own caloric content inside of our foods. And there's better numbers you can also access that I'll show where we can find. But that's going to be a second part of this assignment, was where we're going to try to analyze a recipe to see, well, how good are we at picking a recipe that meets our requirements and gives us the energy and the nutrients we need. Second part of this paper, or this table, is just writing down some of the important features like sodium levels, cholesterol, saturated fats, trans fats, dietary fibers, which we already wrote down, and seeing if it contains any relevant vitamins. In this case, we see that for sodium, there was 180 milligrams or 7% of recommended daily intake. Cholesterol is 0. Saturated fats was, where did I find that? I'm looking at the French, no wonder I'm having trouble. 2%. Trans fats was 0%. Fibers was 7%. And then I could pick one or two of these vitamins and minerals like iron, and let's just do two of them for now, and calcium. Those are not vitamins, but those are minerals. Iron content is 30% my daily intake, and calcium content is 10% my recommended daily intake. So once you have your data recorded, there's going to be a series of questions asking you, for example, about the accuracy of your calories that you calculated, about how good it is for your heart, or if it's exceeding the amount that you should have, and a couple questions just tying it into the nutritional value of the stuff in your food. The second half will be a similar thing, but for a recipe you find. And I'm going to try to get this up later this week. You're going to have like 2 weeks to work on it, so there's no rush there. But I just wanted to at least show you that it's going to contain something with a bare minimum of math. And the math itself is actually easy. It's the mass of carbohydrates minus the mass of the fiber, which remember we can't digest, and we multiply it by 4 calories per gram to get however many calories come from carbs. Do the same thing with proteins, same thing with the total amount of fats, and we can get our total energy. Now, that stuff I can briefly talk about from the slides. I want to show you one or two things there before we call it a day. But let me just check to see if there's any questions about the upcoming assignment, which admittedly is not done yet, but it will be done as soon as I can. So I'm just running the poll here. It's not going to be overly tricky. If you can multiply, you can do the math, and the rest of the questions are going to be relating it to the health and stuff we discuss from the slides and from the readings. Okay, cool. If you do have a question, feel free to ask in a little bit. What I wanted to do now is just run you through some of the key ideas for the next, let's say, 15 minutes, just to cover a little bit of the actual chapter 7. And then we will end it at 5 so that it doesn't go too terribly over. So let me open up the slides. I have those over here. And I'll just talk about some of the key ideas here. Where's my share screen? You are here, new share, slides, and let's full screen this. So chapter 1, I'm just letting people read. It's relatively straightforward, and it shows up on the quiz a little bit, but if you've read through it and you did the practice questions, you're going to be fine. For nutrition, it gets a little bit more scientific. This is where the book starts having some actual sort of physiology or scientific concepts thrown at you, but it doesn't go into great detail. So it's all at a manageable level. Even if you haven't taken high school biology, you will be fine, and you don't need to read the extra slides relating it more to biology because it's all going to be good. So the main idea from these slides is it's going to talk about the 45 essential nutrients that we need to maintain our health and wellness. In this case, when it says essential nutrients, this means this is something that we have to get from food, because we need to get these things in order to live. They're things that we can't live without. They come from our diets. Now, some of these things we can build ourselves, but we need to have the ingredients to build them. So for instance, proteins, fats, carbohydrates, some vitamins we can produce ourselves. Some minerals, we can't produce minerals ourselves because they need to come from our diet, and water has to come from our diet as well. But some of these bigger things we can actually make ourselves, but we need to have the ingredients needed to make them. So what this means is we need to take in these nutrients, and we're actually going to break them down into their components, and we use them to build up our body and to maintain our body. So they have a lot of tables in this section that go into a lot of detail, where if you have the quiz open, it would be a good idea to have the textbook open in another tab. I've set it so that it allows you to go to the readings so that you can verify that information. If it has a question that's a little more technical, you're thinking, geez, I didn't remember this. Open it. It's an open book text. You can verify the answer. And it talks a little bit about proteins, carbs, and fats. And it also gives those energy values I was talking about, which is commonly called the 4-4-9 rule, as a way of remembering and quickly calculating how many calories you are intaking. And as long as you remember that fats are super energy rich, you remember that's the one that's 9 calories per gram. So aside from this, it tells you about the functions of these. Proteins build up most of our body. They're there for muscle mass. They're there for the enzymes we need to do the things that we need to live. Carbohydrates are our main energy source. We need energy to actually do anything and to live and to process these foods. And fats have a bunch of purposes. Our membranes in our cells are actually made up of these fats. So our cells couldn't exist unless we had fat. That includes things like cholesterol, which falls under this sort of fats category. Those are necessary for healthy living. It's just that if we eat a lot of fat, we might be producing more cholesterol than we actually need, which is where it can cause some health problems. Things like vitamins and minerals, they don't really build up parts of our body except for things like calcium, which a calcium ion, Ca2+, is important for building, as you probably guessed, our bones. And they're also important for things like muscle contraction. But in general, vitamins and minerals are going to help with other reactions and processes in our body. Whereas the 3 macronutrients up in the top that I labeled are building blocks for our body. They're making things that we can use, or they're supplying energy. Finally, water is very important. It makes up about 60% of our body weight. And if we didn't have water, we wouldn't have any of the chemistry happening inside our bodies, and we wouldn't be able to live. It's a place for chemicals to actually float around and meet up. And it's also very important for regulating our body temperature. It takes a lot of energy to change the temperature of water. And so it's a very good way of keeping our body temperature. Now, these orange slides, I'm going to skip over most of them, but from my biology class, I teach a lot of the same content about nutrition. I talk about essential nutrients, macronutrients, and micronutrients. And I start off by telling them you are what you eat, because it's literally true. These building blocks are needed to make your body. So far, this is pretty straightforward. What we eat, we break down, and we use it to make our bodies. Now, I'm going through this quickly because we don't need to worry about it for the quiz. But if you're curious, those 3 major macromolecules, the carbohydrates, lipids or fats, and proteins, these are made up of smaller molecules called monomers. This is a little sciencey, and it's why we don't need to know it. But if you put a bunch of monomers together, you create something called a polymer. You might be familiar with polymers from hearing that word, or you might know about plastics as an example of a polymer that takes forever to break down. Well, when we are doing this, we can actually reverse this process. We can consume these large polymers and break them down into monomers. So later on, we'll see, for example, proteins are made up of amino acids. When we consume proteins, we break them down into the component amino acids, which we can use to build new proteins. Yeah, so if you've taken biology in high school, that's exactly what that comes from. I teach an academic upgrading class on high school biology, so some of that will be familiar. The textbook also highlights the main parts of our digestive system, which includes our esophagus. It talks about the trachea, which leads to the lungs. And if you've ever choked on your food or got something going down the wrong pipe, that means that your food accidentally went down the trachea and was heading towards your lungs. And so you have to cough it up so that you don't choke. You don't want to block access to your air. And the liver, spleen, gallbladder, and pancreas are involved in secreting substances needed for the digestive system. And then we have our stomach, which basically stores food and begins some of the breakdown of the food we consume. Digestion actually begins inside the mouth and continues in the stomach and then in the small intestine. So after food passes through the stomach, it enters the small intestine where the vast majority of our actual digestion takes place. So once that food gets down there, this is where if you have, for example, lactose intolerance, you get a stomach ache because you can't break down the sugar in milk, but the bacteria that live in your intestine definitely can. So the sugar passes through without you getting any energy out of it. And then suddenly it's like a big meal for the bacteria, and they produce a lot of gas as a byproduct, which is why you feel bloated and gross if you're drinking milk when you're lactose intolerant. And finally, it's ultimately eliminated out the other end. Now, again, if you're curious, I go through the steps of the process of digestion and I break it down to mechanical, any sort of mixing or chewing, and chemical, involving enzymes that break down these large products. Again, we won't need to know the specifics, but our mouth is the start of the whole process. If you don't chew your food properly, you're not breaking it down and you're making it harder for your stomach and your intestines to do their job. We also break down starches in our mouth. If you've ever done the test where you put a cracker on your mouth, an unsweetened cracker, you let it sit there and you time how long it takes for it to start tasting sweet. That's because we start producing enzymes in our mouth that break down starches right away. And if it tastes sweet to you very quickly, you might be something that is called a super taster, because you might produce a lot of this enzyme. And as a result, you taste sweetness from starches very quickly because you have more of this enzyme. And as a result, you might be more sensitive to certain flavors because you taste them more strongly, more quickly. And the rest of this talks about mechanical and chemical digestion through the rest of the digestive system, and it breaks it down into both components if you're interested. Let me cover a few of the major macro things, and I'll try to maybe get a recording up, or I'll just post the slides for this one and start recording from the next topic. But there is one or two things I wanted to mention. Starting off with protein. As we mentioned, it's a major building block for our body. It makes up all the enzymes and a lot of the structural components of our body. It's needed for our muscles and our bones. It's needed for blood. It's needed for everything. And it's also needed for some of the hormones in our body, which is a way of telling our body how to react to certain situations. And these are all made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, which are very common elements on the Earth, which is good because we need all of them, in the form of amino acids, which I mentioned are the structural components that make up proteins. If you want to know a little bit more about their functions, I do give some specific functions here for proteins, as well as some pictures of different types of proteins. When you're thinking of high protein food, if you eat meat, you might be looking at chicken as an example here. You might be thinking of eggs if you are an ovo-lacto-vegetarian or a person who eats eggs, which contain a lot of protein in them as well. If you're vegetarian or vegan, you might be looking at grains and seeds and nuts and stuff, which also contain a decent amount of proteins. So this is where you usually get your proteins from. Now, I mentioned amino acids are the structures that are put together to build proteins. We don't need to know this in detail, but there are 20 amino acids that we need. So there are 20 amino acids that we need to survive. And we can make some of these if we have certain building blocks, but we need to make sure we're getting the amino acids needed to build our own proteins. This is actually a challenge for people that have restricted diets. If you're vegetarian or vegan, one of the things that happens is that the meat you eat, no, so the meat you don't eat, rather, contains all of these 20 amino acids. But many plants and other sources of protein don't contain all 20 amino acids. So in order to get the ones you need, you have to be careful to look at the type of protein sources you're eating in order to get the right balanced amount of amino acids needed. Now, the one other thing I'm going to show you here is the structure of proteins is pretty complicated. It ends up being a big chain of amino acids that folds and folds and folds until it forms these three-dimensional structures. The three-dimensional structures are various things in our body, structural components, or importantly, things like enzymes. You've probably heard of enzymes. These are proteins that help chemical reactions to occur, and they're absolutely essential for survival. Now, we produce a lot of the enzymes we need, but we can also take in some enzymes. I'm just reading in chat, is consuming too much protein at once or more than we need bad? Yes, and for all these things, taking too much of any one thing can be bad. I think very soon I talk about what happens if you take in too much protein, so I'll just hold off for a second. Now, the reason I'm emphasizing enzymes is because there's a certain risk with cooking food and eating it. So let me briefly talk about this slide where we're frying an egg. Frying an egg is a chemical change. The actual egg itself contains a lot of proteins inside of it, and when you cook it, you see that the texture of the egg changes quite a bit. It goes from runny yellow and white to this solid white sort of structure that has very different properties and it tastes different. That's because adding heat breaks down this three-dimensional structure, basically reversing the process until you have a broken or denatured protein. The benefit of cooking food is it's easier to digest. We've broken down part of it already, so our body does an easier job of breaking it down. But if you're eating something that has a lot of active enzymes for digestion, for example, cooking it could kill off those enzymes and it could denature proteins that you might want to take into your diet. So that's where being careful about what kind of foods you cook and how you cook them could influence your health. Is it okay to take amino acids in a day when doing some lifts to even lift? In this case, it depends. There's going to be a certain amount you need that I'm not at the moment qualified to say. I'm not 100% certain, but they do have a list of recommended intake. And one of the things they do mention that is definitely important is if you're more physically active, you are going to need more of these components and more energy to build up. If you're trying to put on mass, or in the sake of the show Always Sunny in Philadelphia, if you're like Mac and you're trying to cultivate mass and put on weight, then you are needing more amino acids to build that muscle mass. Now, very quickly, as mentioned, complete protein sources are those that have all the essential amino acids, such as meat, fish, poultry, eggs, milk, cheese, and soy. Pretty much everything here is an animal product, whereas most plants don't have all the amino acids we would need. So this is where, if you have a vegetarian or vegan diet, you just want to be a little bit more careful. I'm just going to get to the end of the protein stuff, and then I think we can call it. In response to the quiz, the question, finish quiz 1, do the readings about nutrition and the assignment. I would do the reading about nutrition first because quiz 1 covers chapter 1 and chapter 7, which includes this nutrition stuff. But aside from that, yeah, do the readings and then the assignment, which I'll post a little bit later. And the recommended intake, so this is responding to that question in a way, is 0.8 grams per kilogram. So if you know your mass in kilograms, you could calculate what's the recommended or sort of adequate, the minimum intake of protein you need. And you could take, for instance, if I'm 80 kilograms, I could multiply this by 0.8 grams per kilogram to see how much protein I should be taking in a day. And if I do this, 80 times 0.8 divided by 1 is 64 grams of protein for me to sort of maintain my body. The quiz time limit is 15 minutes and there's 10 questions. I'll tell you this right now since I have space on this slide. Each quiz is formatted the same way. The actual quiz itself will contain the first chapter and the second chapter, whichever those chapters are. This is just to number the first of the chapters and second of the chapters. It's going to have one easy true or false question, one easy multiple choice question, two medium multiple choice questions, and one hard, as decided by the textbook, multiple choice. Then this exact pattern repeats for the second chapter, just to give you a solid structure for all these quizzes so that they're familiar as you go through them. And it means that everyone will have a similar difficulty of a quiz, even if it's randomly generated. So just to finish up this protein stuff, you can get protein. This is coming from a different lesson I talked about, which you find in eggs, milk products, all the stuff we just talked about. But if you have a very high protein diet, which is one of the questions someone asked me, the proteins, when we're digesting them, we're breaking them down into amino acids again. Amino acids contain nitrogen, and if we have too many, our kidneys work to get rid of the excess nitrogen and the excess amino acids. They do this by producing nitrogen-containing compounds like urea, which forms urine, and that's from breaking down amino acids. If you have way too much protein intake, you're putting yourself at risk of damaging your kidneys or getting kidney stones from these salts and things that can't dissolve very well that block your kidney. And as a result, it becomes very painful. And if you've ever heard of people passing a kidney stone, or if you've ever watched the HBO show, I forgot the name of it, Deadwood, there's a horrible scene where one of the main characters has to pass a kidney stone with 1800s technology, and it is horrifying. So maintaining the proper level of protein intake and not overdoing it can help avoid issues with your kidney and liver later on. This is, I think, the final slide before it moves over to the next one. So just to finish up at least one of these macronutrients, the rest of them are presented in a similar manner. The protein content, recommended protein intake is shown here, and a lot of the guides are a little bit old-fashioned, and Canada has been catching up with it a little bit, where they would list our protein content and alternatives, because all the old guides used to say you have to eat meat. But now that we realize that people don't live that same lifestyle anymore, that's why they have other sources such as tofu, beans, yogurt, which is spelled interestingly here, cheese, which obviously won't work out if you're vegan, but this as well. But there's different kinds of protein intakes, and it tells you how much protein can be found in each of these foods. So I'm going to end it there because I don't want to go any longer than this, but the rest of this slideshow covers the other macronutrients like fats, talks about how fats are useful for generating hormones. It's got some cute animals in here. It shows you once again the breakdown of fats are made up from these components. Then only the slides that have the turquoise kind of greenish background are stuff that contain information that could be on the quiz. Remember, all orange is additional if you want to tie it a little more to science. And it does the same thing for fats, talks about omega fatty acids, talks about cholesterol, which a lot of people have questions on. I'd be willing to stick around for a couple minutes after if anyone had any questions. Talks about sugars and talks about refined grains, etc. take a look through this. Insulin is, we're talking about diabetes. That's something people might have questions about, but I'm not going to go into detail now just because I want to end it. So let me check to see if there was any questions someone wanted to include on the recording. If you did have an interest in this stuff, and you wanted to ask some questions now while I'm here, I can stick around for a little while. Or if you had any questions about the upcoming quizzes or anything there. So just as a reminder, I pushed the wrong button. I think I closed the poll. No, it's happening. Let me exit this slide. Let me go back to our website and just remind you where you can find this stuff. So new share website. If you want to just focus on the information needed for the quiz, go to our slideshows and click the magenta one that says Chapter 7 Nutrition Slideshow PDF. If you want to have a little additional biology context, click the orange one that says Nutrition plus additional biology slides, not on quiz. That's your personal choice. Yes, there's a question that someone will be typing in chat for the recording. And while they're typing that, just as a reminder, for next week, I've extended the quiz. So the quiz only has to be done by the following week, Monday. So you have more time unless you're trying to get them all done. Yes, quiz 1 is both chapter 1 and 7. That's the other thing I changed is if I go to course information, I forgot to show this. I now have the calendar up and I switched the order around. I realized that the order that the outline they had given me didn't make sense because it was set up for a condensed 6-week course in the summer, and they had to make sure that they timed it so that they would have access to the gym. So they split it so you'd be doing something more theory based and then something based on like muscular strength or cardiorespiratory endurance once every week so that you didn't have to double it up and they could actually spread out the gym stuff. Because we're not doing the gym stuff, I rearranged it in a way that's going to be easier to follow along rather than the original order. Is it sensible to, I'm going to answer this question after I end the recording. What if someone has a high protein diet? How would you calculate it? You could check within the limits. Our textbook tells you a little bit about how many proteins you would need. Do I still have this open? How to lower the cholesterol? Nope, that is just a thing that I was looking at. If we go to our textbook, wherever it may be in my tabs, it does talk about the recommended intake, and it does give you sort of numbers for these things. I'll take a look and I'll show you where to find it after class. Right now, I'm not sure. But there is a place to calculate it. They will tell you how much is needed based on your activity level and your overall body structure. Okay, I'm going to end it here. I'll stick around and answer more questions. But like I said, for the first chapter, I don't think I'm going to post a recorded lecture because that's from long ago. And I took a lot of time getting the quizzes up, but it's good that they're up. And for chapter 7, check out the slides. And if you have more questions about this and people are interested, I might still be able to put up a shortened lecture on the rest of it. But if you're comfortable reading yourself through the content and you're comfortable looking at the slides, if you wanted to see some of the extra stuff, you're going to do great. You don't need the lecture. I'm here to help the lecture material make more sense, because that was another one of the things I read, is that people didn't always like just having to do the reading and then the professor wasn't trying to help you understand anything. But I'm going to be here to help. If the lections are based on the text, could we just, use the slides rather than the book? It won't give you the full picture. You won't get the full explanations in between, but the slides do have the key information on them. Yes, it just means that you wouldn't be able to have access to the Connect stuff like the quizzes. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. In the meantime, I'm going to say, everyone, take care. Email me if you have any questions. Stick around for at least a few seconds after the chat or after this recording ends. And everyone, good luck. I'll try to get all the marks back to you this week and get your assignment posted now that I got all the quizzes and stuff sorted out. So everyone, take care and have a good rest of the week. I'm going to end the recording now.